Hello and welcome to Come to Think of It, the podcast diary program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. Dilbert was an American cartoon. It ran in 1999 and 2000, spanning 2 seasons for 30 episodes entirely. The first season comprised 13 episodes, and then the second season comprised 17. The show looks very smart and clean and slick, so it was wonderfully produced, and it looks like it could stand up even today amongst B-grade or C-grade American cartoons. It certainly doesn't have the flashiness of the A-grade cartoons that we see today, but it certainly is competent and robust and healthy and stable, and so it certainly is not a bad job. The first problem was that Dilbert was produced not by a major, mainstream, wealthy and powerful television network. It was in fact produced by a very small and new and niche network, and this really was the downfall of the show. It meant that the show did not have as much support and resources that it needed, and it also meant that the show was placed at a time slot at night where not a lot of people were watching that network anyway. And besides, the show that went on before Dilbert was infamously bad quality and was not getting a lot of viewers, so people would have had to switch over to this network at the time in order to make sure that they caught Dilbert. Now, those sorts of things meant that Dilbert had very little chance of being successful, and that meant that things were going against it. Despite this, Dilbert became that TV network's most popular program. It was remarkably successful. It was nominated for many awards and it won many others, and this is testament to how terrific it was written. The acting was top-notch. They also got celebrity guest appearances, and there was a certain development of character throughout the show, plus other factors like world building and also a 2-part episode. So the show ended up being cancelled in a very disappointing and lackluster fashion, and in the time since, which has nearly been 20 years, there has been no serious attempt at reviving Dilbert for a new cartoon show. One can find little animated shorts on YouTube, which are more or less the 3-panel comic strip put into a sort of cheap animated form. This is particularly disappointing because at the time, Scott Adams talked about how excited he was about actually having this cartoon show, because he would be able to take a step away from the limitations of the 3-panel comic strip, which obviously limits the type of jokes and the type of stories that can be told, and he can actually explore things in interesting ways, in more detail, actually have bigger jokes, bigger stories, and more character development. So he was obviously very excited about this opportunity of making Dilbert the cartoon show, and it's very disappointing the fact that it's been nearly 20 years since, and he has never been given another opportunity, despite the fact that when Dilbert was on the air, it was a remarkable success. And I'm afraid there is just not enough demand out there amongst Dilbert fans, amongst cartoon watching fans, for a new Dilbert show. Now, my favourite parts of Dilbert were the simple jokes. You see, Scott Adams, before he went on to work for the Dilbert comic strip, he was an office worker. And this is really shown off in Dilbert, because a lot of the best jokes that can be found in the comic strip and the cartoon are the office humour jokes, where bureaucracy overpowers common sense, where office politics and office rumours and other matters like that seem to make a certain burlesque, perverse, absurd environment in which ridiculous things happen which normally wouldn't. All forms of logic and reason are abandoned for specific procedural administration within a particular office workplace. The show is very good at exposing this type of comedy, to actually show how the workplace, the office space, can often be a source of absolute incompetence and absurdity, where decisions are made in very silly ways, where consultation, committees and meetings take place in such a disorganized manner, where public relations and marketing seem to override actual substantive content in terms of what is actually being released as a commercial product, and the way that management is filled with incoherent gibberish and doesn't actually involve substantive helping of the situation, and it is just trapped in a certain bubble of jargon language and Fox managerial organisation. Now, the unfortunate thing about Dilbert the cartoon show is that it also has another element of comedy, which is the cartoony, wild, crazy, fantastical elements which break down the certain simplistic absurdity of the office complex jokes. There are plenty of jokes out there which are not nearly as funny, which are not nearly as set up, which are not as realistic, but are more bombastic and crazy and out there and wow. And these jokes eventually come to override the show, and the show just becomes an ordinary cartoon show like you would find a dime a dozen throughout television. And so the very thing that made Dilbert unique and special and so wonderful eventually disappeared. And that's not to say that the final episodes of the second season were not good. There was plenty of really good stuff, but it was just so unrealistic and over the top, filled with such wild and cartoony and immaterial ideas and concepts and characters and devices and tools and environments, that it just didn't have that lovely, clever touch of subtlety and wit and sarcasm and sardonic irony that made Dilbert, and has been making Dilbert, such a wonderful and exciting franchise all these years. And that's why it seems to be that although Dilbert is a lost relic for us, although it did not deserve to be cancelled, although it has never received the recognition that it deserved, and although it certainly ought to be retained and remembered as a wonderful little cartoon show that brought us so many good laughs, I'm afraid to say that by the end, by the final second half of the second season, it just lost its way. There were too many episodes which were just too silly, too over the top, and the whole enjoyment that came out of watching the show just eventually vanquished, and it became almost boring. So what I want to do is pay tribute to what Dilbert was able to present us with, the good parts about Dilbert, to actually pay tribute that it was a funny show full of great simple office humour, and try to just pass by the more cartoony, absurd stuff which I believe is nowhere near as good. That is my mission, that is what I'm trying to do, and I hope that I will be able to achieve it and actually pay tribute to Dilbert as a cartoon show that did so much good when it was on the air. Dilbert is a really fascinating character because he seems to be always the victim of bureaucracy, of managerial speak, of managerial misconduct, of marketing misconduct, and in the end he never gets the work assignments that he deserves, he never gets the recognition for the accomplishments he deserves, and he ends up constantly not being fulfilled and satisfied in his job as an engineer. And so he's constantly being the straight guy while viewing the absurdity of the world around him. And yet, at the same time, he never actually decides to do anything in order to try to relieve the situation, such as quit, fight back, work harder, try and call people out for their bad behaviour, all the sorts of things that you would expect a main character who's trapped in a circus of idiocy would try to do. And this is obviously a real problem because we're meant to be sympathising with him, and yet he never actually does anything. He just sort of accepts the world in the ridiculous and ugly and hopeless manner that it is. And so in a sense, Dilbert is the sign of the hopelessness of the situation. That the world, and in particularly the corporate world, might be a farce, might be stupid, might be pathetic, might be controlled and run by idiots, but in the end, he does not have the power to change anything, he does not have the resources to make the world a better place, and he does not have the courage to actually stand up for what he believes in, and so in the end, he just accepts it. He accepts being a pathetic, unimportant cog in this gigantic, absurd machine of ridiculous and farcical nonsense. And so there is a certain nihilistic pessimism within the character of Dilbert. Although he is honourable, although he has principles, although he tries to believe that he's doing good in the world, in the end he is the sign of the American worker who decides to put up with gibberish and hopelessness and idiocy in the hope of just getting by in the world. And so although there is something very dark and depressing about Dilbert, it is a wonderful piece of commentary. His character is a fascinating symbolic gesture of what the American workplace is within a corporate bureaucracy that is riddled with idiocy, and you just don't want to fight back to make the world a better place, and you seem content to just sit there in your cubicle and mock it all by being a passive observer of it from the outside, although in this case from the inside. You've been listening to Come to Think of It, the podcast diary program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. Until next time, goodbye.